and usually we give like 3 minutes for people to connect and we start. Okay, so let's go for this couple minutes and we start. I know that some people will connect in a couple minutes, but this is our goal. Like we start now at 10 in the morning here in Brazil time. And welcome everybody. Maybe it's like a good afternoon for you, good morning, or even like good evening. And this is our global seminar. My name is Daniel Parreiras. I am from FDC Business School, a business school based in Brazil. I'll be here like doing the opening, and right after I'm gonna give the word for Diego, our colleague from FDC. I'm working here together with Matheus Coutinho as well, uh, the guy that was managing all the organization of this global seminar. So thank you very much, Matheus, to be with us
Thank
and,
you,
or
Daniel.
and organizing all of that. Welcome everybody. For me, it's a big honor. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Our global seminar, it's a very special initiative that we created to connect FTC with the world with very interesting themes and topics that could be something new or something that bring good news for your company, for your life as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as a manager in your organization. So welcome one more time. Our dynamic here, we're gonna have 1 hour, right, Matheus?
Yeah, 1 hour.
We're gonna have 1 hour, so we're gonna go until 11 and 5 minutes in Brazilian time. And we have two professors from Galway, Esther and Vanessa, and we have from FDC, Diego Marconato, which is our full-time professor that will be here with us today. I am in charge for the International Affairs and Global Strategy area at FDC, and I'll be here together with you guys. But Diego will be the professor guiding and being the anchor of this global seminar today. Okay, so let's start this beautiful global seminar. Today we're going to have a very specific and very important theme. And the name for our global seminar today is Mastering the Art of Scaling, Key Strategy and Insights for Business Expansion. I already introduced myself. So I'm going to go and introduce Diego. Diego Marconato is our full-time professor. And you guys can see in a few minutes, I'm going to give the word to him. Professor Diego is a researcher of a small and medium business growth in general, and he has a lot of contribution in this area at FDC. He helps business to better understand and optimize their finances, business models, and operations. His researches focus on this field that I told you guys, in specific the growth of that and development through the lens of multiple theories and aspects. Okay. And we have our partner university here from Ireland, University of Galway. And we have Professor Steer Tipman, established professor of strategy and head of discipline management and co-director of the Center of Entrepreneurial Growth and Scaling. Steer's research concerns the international strategy of organization, especially globally scaling and digital business. And we have also Professor Vanessa Bretas, assistant professor in management and member of the Center of Entrepreneurial Growth and Scaling. Her research focuses on global strategy, international business, and entrepreneurship. And she's interested in international entry strategies, entrepreneurship, growth, and scaling. So a lot to talk about scaling and how companies are dealing with that, right? I can imagining that professors are really looking for that. So welcome everybody one more time. Feel free to post your question and interactions in the chat if needed. Today we have a huge audience and that could be hard, like to give like the opportunity for everybody to open the microphones. But if you feel like, I'll be very happy. So just raise your hand. I'll be happy to take your question with your microphone open or in the chat. Okay, so over to you, Diego. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very happy with this opportunity. to host Professor Esther, Dr. Vanessa, and to talk about this topic, which is very, very important. I had the pleasure to spend a whole month in Galway last February. That's right. We were talking about the weather because Galway has a very, well, Ireland in general has a very particular weather, but it was a very, very good experience. And I could see firsthand the vibrant environment that Ireland has when it comes to scaling businesses. And when we talk about scaling, it's interesting because I was more accustomed to the idea of business growth and high growth businesses. And actually, it was with Professor Vanessa, Professor Esther, and Dr. Vanessa, and Professor Jonathan that I learned more about what scaling is and how scaling differs from growth. And actually, I was quite surprised to see how different both processes and roles can be. Growing businesses are very important because usually they're responsible for the bulk of new jobs, for a lot of innovation, economic prosperity, and so on. But again, scaling businesses, when we talk about scaling businesses, we're talking about a different kind of animal, right? And we want to explore more about that with Dr. Vanessa and Professor Esther, who are really global renowned specialists on the topic. So it's a great, great honor to have you here with us. Thank you very much, Esther and Vanessa. And now I give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Diego, for the warm welcome. We're delighted to be here. And yeah, to get us started, we have a few questions prepared for you because we just felt we wanted to get a little bit of a sense of the audience, to get to meet you, and then, yeah, to relate our presentation, our discussions points a bit more to whatever you're going to respond to us. So Diego will guide you through that first part.
Yes, thank you, Esther. You know what? I just I forgot it. That was a bit sorry. Yeah. So everybody, please, we have a question here for you. Just for us to someone has the audio open. I think it's Ricardo. So we have two questions for you, just to kickstart our conversation. The first one is, how familiar are you with the differences between business growth and business scaling? So you can read this QR code here, or you can use I think Mateus just put the link into the chat box. You can use both, or either to take your vote. And right now we have 1.2, 1.6. I'll give you a few minutes. Then we're gonna go. You have two questions there. First, let's take a look at the results of the first question, and then you can move on to the second one. So right in the middle, 22 answers. Come on, folks. 32, 1.6.
People are thinking. Those questions.
Yeah.
Those questions make us think about our business.
Oh yeah, a lot. You know, I still remember the first time I talked to Professor Esther. She asked me that question, but Diego, are you like, what do you know about the difference? Actually, that was exactly the same question he asked me. I still remember trying to mumbling around and trying to answer the question. So 61 answers, 1.6. Yeah, I think it's a very good sample right now, 64. So let's move on to the second question. You can get back to this one after. The second question is, which factor do you believe is the most critical for a business to scale successfully? Oh, organizational culture is the first one. The second one, adoption of digital technologies. That's usually first time I heard the term scaling, actually, I can tell you I made a connection with technology. Yeah, 43%, 67 answers, organizational culture and digital technologies. The less popular option is a strategic location in a global city. Yeah, scaling experience. Cool. So we have the winner, a clear winner here, organizational culture. And we're right in the middle when it comes to the knowledge on the difference between growth and scaling. Yeah, nice. Okay, so I think now it's the time. Esther and Vanessa, please feel free to take it from here.
I don't know if it's Vanessa. Oh, there you go. Now I can hear you. Yeah, perfect.
First, I want to thank Diego, Daniel, Mateus for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be here together with Esther to talk about scaling. A pleasure to be here also talking with a Brazilian audience. So in the first part of the discussion, we are going to explore what is scaling, and I'll hand over to Esther on that. But first, I want to briefly give some context on business scaling in Brazil. So you can have an idea of some companies, some examples that can illustrate companies that are scaling or have scaling ambitions in the Brazilian context. Usually, when we think about scaling, the term unicorns comes to our mind. Unicorns are the private companies that are valuated over $1 billion, but they are a quite rare animal, right? So in Brazil, currently, we have 17 unicorns. As you can see here in this chart, more than a half of these unicorns operate in financial services sector. As the examples here that you can see, eBanks, that is a payment platform that is based in Curitiba, and also Quinto Andar, that is pretty much famous rental platform in Brazil, founded in 2012 in Campinas. But you can also see unicorns in different sectors, such as consumer and retail, enterprise tech, that includes cloud web services and other services for enterprise, industrials, and media and entertainment. So, for instance, Madeira Madeira is an online furniture store that is based in Paraná, and they are a unicorn. And Wildlife Studios is a mobile gaming company that was founded in 2011 in São Paulo. We have also different sectors when considering the unicorns, Brazilian unicorns. But then, so if you could please, thanks. It's important to understand that scaling is not only about unicorns. Many companies of different sizes, different ages, they are successfully scaling their businesses. And here you can see some examples of mid-sized Brazilian companies from different sectors that are growing rapidly and scaling. So we have here, as example, TechBiz, that is specialized in forensic technology and cybersecurity, cyber strategy technology. They are scaling, or they are expanding internationally. So they have some offices in US and Angola. And the other company here that is also expanding internationally is Petbowl, that is a fashion company founded in 2012 in São Paulo, and they are distributing their products to 26 countries at the moment. But we also have some examples of Brazilian companies that are growing fast, scaling in the domestic market. As you can see here, Ecofort, that is a cotton seed oil refinery that is based in Ceará. They are expanding in the domestic market. And Photos, that is a distributor of photovoltaic equipment, and they are based in Espírito Santo, and they are also growing the domestic market. So just to give you a bit of context, now I'm going to hand over to Esther to discuss the differences between starting, growing, and scaling a business.
Yeah, thanks so much, Vanessa. And yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to be here today and to see such a great turnout as well. So thanks to everyone for joining us today on the call. As Vanessa already said, scaling companies come in different shapes and sizes. And I suppose a key question really is then, you know, what is scaling? And in particular, maybe to differentiate it vis-a-vis kinds of business growth or business activities that may seem similar. And obviously one is business startup activity and also business growth or high growth, which are somewhat related, but yet scaling is distinctive. And by the way, when Diego was talking about his visit to Ireland, which was very, very interesting because it also gave us an opportunity to learn more about the Brazilian business landscape, and obviously build the foundations also for that seminar today. And yeah, I know it does rain a lot in Ireland, so Diego definitely didn't come for the weather, right? So that, yeah, and unfortunately we have quite some rain here. But going back to topic, when we think about starting a business, we really think about a stage or a phase in the life of an organization where it's all about experimenting, trial and error learning to define product market fit and to define a viable business model. So really the early phases in an organization and also for a new initiative. So even perhaps if you're working in an established business, you may be experimenting with a new venture idea or some kind of diversification idea. So it is all about identifying a viable value proposition, to identify and test a delivery system, so an activity system that sits around it to deliver the value proposition, including also a revenue model, because obviously you want to not only create some value, but you also want to capture some value as a business. High failure rate, all about experimentation. When we think about growing a business or an organization, we really start to think about executing this viable business model. And when we think about growth, we think about a steady increase in output. So a steady increase in the number of customers or users that we're serving, or a steady increase in employee numbers, or a steady increase also in revenues. So for example, if you think about, let's say, a business of 10 million revenue, you might be thinking of a scenario where every year you're adding maybe 2 million or so in revenue. 2 million one year, 2 million next year, 2 million the year after. So after about 5 years, the size of the business would be around 20 million or so in revenue. With scaling, we're talking really about a certain type of such rapid growth, because really what we're doing here is we have a viable business model that we also seek to execute and leverage at scale, but typically with an exponential increase in output. And if you think about an exponential increase, what does that look like? It means that we're growing, let's say, by a certain percentage year on year. So that we, so going back maybe to a company that has about 10 million revenue, that we have a scenario where we're growing perhaps by 20% or more per year, for example, over 3 to 5 years. So again, looking at that over a 5-year situation, we would be looking at an enterprise at the end of at least of 25 million in revenue. So because as an exponential growth, what you see is maybe a slow slope at the start, an increase, but then it accelerates and we get to see a little bit more that steep incline. Maybe if you think also, unfortunately, the spread of viruses would have similar types of curves, or if you think about compound interest, yeah, there's similar types of situations where you would see such an exponential function. What then is quite interesting about that is obviously that not all high growth firms are scaling businesses. So we're really talking about a subset of growing businesses that are actually scaling. And what I think is also important is that scaling in itself is agnostic to the type of firm or the age of a firm. Obviously, we tend to observe it more maybe in younger firms, that have finished their startup phase and are now ready to exploit and leverage their business model. But it could also similarly be a more mature, established enterprise that through maybe transformation or through innovation identifies a new viable business model that can now be scaled, or as it can be maybe a company that is diversifying and setting up a new business venture as a spin-off that then seeks to scale. It's also not only in tech. Even the examples that Vanessa would have mentioned, obviously tech is an enabler, but it's not confined to tech businesses. I know that this slide is quite dense, so I won't go through it in detail, but it teases out the differences between starting, growing, and scaling businesses in more detail. What I would like to draw your attention to is the column on the very right on scaling. And maybe the top right corner around the goal of scaling. So why would a business be bothered with scaling? And often it is to develop the business to a competitive size, so that it's really about making sure the business becomes viable from a competitive strategy perspective, from a financial perspective, and oftentimes scaling in terms of this very rapid, persistent growth that has an exponential function. Is also driven by early mover advantages in certain industries, so that where really speed is critical. What I would also like to draw your attention to is some of the key challenges in the bottom right corner there. So obviously the organization is becoming larger, so it's important obviously to as opposed to formalize processes, to create more specialized roles, to build out functional areas, to really start building out an organization. But for employees and managers who experience that and going through it, they often describe it as chaos, as turmoil, as quite chaotic, because so much is happening within scaling businesses within a short period of time. And even in a large scale stakeholder study that we would have done, where we would have asked business managers, we would have asked founders, we would have asked different stakeholders who support scaling businesses, but also program makers that offer certain types of educational experience or support programs for scaling companies, that they had there was quite some variation how they described scaling, but they actually did agree on this need for internal transformation, because it's such a big change for companies that this has to be managed really, really proactively and intensively. So I hope at least it gives a sense of the definition of what scaling is. And by the way, your initial answers of I think about was half of the attendees in the audience is that I'm somewhat familiar. So hopefully, we have pushed some more of you into the category of I'm feeling much more familiar with what scaling is. And by the way, your answers, they're the answers we typically get, because sometimes scaling is also been used as a buzzword, but then when you really try to tease it out, what are the differences between starting, growing, and scaling businesses, it does become more nuanced. So in that sense, it was useful to start with that also here today. We have done, in combination, many years of research on that topic. Here in the Center for Entrepreneurial Growth and Scaling at University of Galway, we're in existence since 2022. We have about a dozen of researchers, academics, PhDs, postdocs that are actively engaged in these areas. So there's an active, research activity, but there's also a strong outreach presence in terms of executive engagement, in terms of training providers on certain scaling programs. So even looking across that, we have learned a couple of lessons of what is important for executives and founders to scale businesses successfully. I don't know if there is a one-size-fits-all answer yet. So what we will share today is, I suppose, a little bit of a selection as to some of the areas that we would have found as important. So with that, I'd like to pass over again to Vanessa to share the first one.
Thanks, Esther. It was very interesting to see the answers from you on what do you think are the critical factor for scaling, and to see that these was like the least relevant point that you consider. And I think it's interesting because this is one of the lessons that we got from our studies, that actually it doesn't matter. You don't need to be in a global city necessarily to scale. So it's nice to see that you all have this perception that is not something like that can prevent scaling at some sense. And this is what we got from our studies and our conversations with companies. So you don't have to be in a global city to scale. Companies that are not located in global cities or in hotspots such as Silicon Valley, for example, they can also get access to specific resources and supports that they need to scale through proactive and purposeful networking. So they can leverage their connections, they can expand their connections across location to really go after what they need to scale, even if they are located in a place that can have some constraints in terms of resources or support availability. So they can do that by extending their pre-existing networks or leveraging their local connections, and they can use these local connections as trusted intermediaries or connectors to facilitate introductions in other places. So I'm going to give you one example that comes from one of our studies, that is the Irish company Fenergo. Fenergo is a software as service company. They are specialized in fintech software solutions, and they were founded in 2009 in Dublin, and since then they have been through different scaling events. Fenergo, since an early stage, they have received support from local institutional partners, such as the Enterprise Ireland, that is a government agency that helps Irish companies to grow and to internationalize. A kind of, if you can make a parallel, it would be similar to what Apex Brazil does in the country. So through these first connections with the local institutional partner, they gain access to other people who have gone through this journey, the scaling journey before. They also had access to contacts in other locations that were relevant for them. They also leverage other local connections, such as clients in Ireland or partners in Ireland, that help them to reach out to new partners and new clients in other locations. But as business grows, so this is a kind of first interaction with their local connections since in early stages of growing. And then as they grow, as the business grows, the engagement of with other key connectors, especially investors or specialized service providers, for example, consultancy firms, lawyers or advisors, this becomes more important in terms of providing specific resources for scaling. And also to provide access to sources of supports that they need elsewhere. Some of these connectors, they can act as brokers, for example, enhancing or enabling that companies can reach out to other ecosystems in other places to have access to relevant supports. Returning to Fenergo's case, in 2013, they received a big funding from big investment from a fund. So in the first moment, it was for $4 million. And this was followed by a 75 million investment from venture capital, a global venture capital firm that is called Insight Partners in 2015. And with this increased investment, with this relationship with new investors, they got not only financial resources, but they also got support from these investors in terms of connections. So these investors, they connect Fenergo with other partners and clients in other locations that were very important for them to scale internationally. So at the moment, currently, Fenergo has a huge global client community that includes, for example, BNP Paribas, Salesforce, Mizuho Americas, and other big clients in different countries. So to sum up, this is the first lesson that can be relevant for companies. You don't need to be in a global city. You can leverage your networks. You can really engage in active networking to access the supports that you need to scale. Hand back to you, Esther.
Thank you. Yeah, our second point relates to the adoption of digital technologies or digitalization. And I think it was about 17% of the audience who thought that this was the most critical one, and it certainly is. I mean, obviously, you don't have to be a fully digital business to scale. However, digitalization certainly enables scaling. And an example here that I would like to share with you is Qualtrics. So Qualtrics, the US experience management platform. You may know it from maybe from a user side in terms of online surveys, typically that you may have been asked to complete. Obviously, they have been in existence for many, many years, founded before the .com bubble. It's a SaaS business, so it's a fully digital business. So I suppose being fully digital, obviously it means that a product has a high geographic reach. It's ubiquitous, so it can be, I suppose, sold and accessed from anywhere. It's non-location bound, 24/7, 365 days around the clock. So when they were scaling, initially they scaled domestically within the US market only. And they could manage that entire scaling journey from their Utah offices, so from their home base, because they had also an inside sales model highly overlaid with sales intelligence and quite structured sales processes. And similarly in terms of their customer supports. And it also, I mean, what they did observe was that obviously then being fully online, they started to get some ad hoc sales from international markets. So without even going after international markets, they already started generating, you know, in the low digit numbers of total sales from international markets. And it was only much later, maybe in their journey, when they consciously and strategically internationalized. But that geographic reach definitely opened out possibilities to expand beyond their region initially, and then also internationally. It also allows to intermediate, maybe cut out the middleman and go straight to the end users. And also maybe to Vanessa's point, it enables perhaps also to access different sources of supports in different jurisdictions. So what we tend to see also is, for example, that venture capital flows much more or can flow internationally. So now also VCs might be much more willing to invest in promising international ventures because they know they can easily support virtually as well. So that obviously also enables scaling journeys. But I think underlying digitalization is this idea that they allow possibilities for scale-free resources and scale-free processes. A little bit here, maybe it's already in the name, right? This idea of scale and scaling. But digital resources, what that means is that you have very low or perhaps negligible marginal costs of adding additional users or customers. So once you have the right digital infrastructures in place, they can quite easily accommodate a sharp increase in output, which obviously really enables and accelerates scaling. Overlaid then perhaps with AI, big data analytics really allows maybe then to enhance even the value proposition that you can offer to customers. And also what's important, especially in dynamic markets, digital resources and processes are also relatively flexible, adaptable, and malleable, because I know I'm simplifying, but you're changing maybe structures of codes that are relatively easily reprogrammable. So that also allows a level of flexibility and adaptability and responsiveness to changing needs, which is useful. to remain relevant in dynamics markets as a company scales. So definitely digitalization would be up there for us in one of the some of the lessons learned. By the way, I know we have a numbering here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as we go through them. It's not necessarily that they're ranked in order. I mean, they're not ranked in order by no means. It just meant that these were sort of the ideas that we felt we wanted to touch upon today. In relation to network effects, I think if I remember correctly, it was around 12-13% of you who scored that most highly. And I think maybe those of you that did score it quite highly, I may imagine that you had perhaps some kind of scaling businesses in mind where network effects really, really matter. So for example, if you think about apps, Instagram, WhatsApp, TikTok, even the kind of communication apps, social networking apps that you may be using, obviously positive externalities within user networks are hugely important, and especially if scaling companies can ignite them. So if a scaling company in the early stages of their journey can ignite these network effects, obviously it sets off a self-reinforcing cycle, a snowballing effect in motion, where you get ever more increases in users and customers without maybe having to invest a lot of having to make a lot of investments. And I suppose trying to ignite these network externalities, you're obviously thinking about maybe lead users or lead markets that are early adopters of your technology to get these kind of effects going. But these kind of network effects, they may also happen on the supplier side. So here an example could be platform type of business models. So for example, a US healthcare platform called Signify Health, they're disrupting the US healthcare sector at the moment because they're offering a platform that brings together different kind of healthcare practitioners, well-being, health-related services, different types of nurses and doctors to really enable better patient outcomes through a more integrated and personalized patient journey. And here, obviously, the value is also for suppliers, because the more complementers you have on such platforms, the more holistic care in an easy term you can offer. Obviously, that encourages other suppliers to also join the platform, or more doctors or more nurses to come along, because it also enables the health services that they can offer. So yes, network effects may matter, especially for platform type of businesses during their scaling, maybe on the demand side, could be on the supply side, and could in fact be on both sides. I mean, when we put these slides together, I mean, Vanessa and I really had to make also some hard choices as to the lessons learned that we felt to share with you today. But having scaling experience and that how valuable of a resource that is was really one. It's maybe more a softer element, but it really stood out for us, and we really wanted to make sure we do include that. And I would like to go back again to Qualtrics that I mentioned to you earlier, the experience management platform. The co-founder, Ryan, at that time, he was still in college when he founded it. I don't think he ever completed his marketing degree. So he was really first-time entrepreneur, had a great idea, had a great initial product, but obviously it was all new to him. However, his older brother, Jared, at that time, he worked for Google. He was a software engineer, and he would have joined Google during the early stages when it was only a couple of hundred employees, when nobody knew what Google would become. But he would have seen Google scale, and he became really a senior VP, a quite senior person within Google during the later years. But once Qualtrics was ready for scaling, Ryan, he said, I need your brother. Leave your highway job in Google. You have to come and head the family here. And so he did, and the rest is history. When Qualtrics was scaling, it was the fastest growing software company at that time. But yeah, obviously Jared, and Ryan would always give a lot of credit to Jared. He was always in the background, but he just said Jared knows how to build the product. to be scalable. He knows what processes we need that are scalable. If I build something, it's going to bring us in the next months, in the next 2 months, but Jared knows what we need building so that it will be good for us in 1 or 2 or 3 years time. And what we tend to see is obviously that as managers gain experience, they learn rules of thumb. So they learn mental shortcuts that from the experience that allow them to make relatively good decisions under high degree of uncertainty. But I think where it's particularly useful in scaling is because they have this foresight. Because once you're on that scaling journey and that big demand will come your way, you want to be ready to capitalize on that through that experience that these managers bring. They can put the right steps in place, be very proactive in transforming the business and make the right moves at the right time to be ready for that scaling journey. And I was really delighted to see that was your top one, right? Culture, because obviously it's a soft one, a soft factor, and a lot of founders may be a bit hesitant to fully admit it, that culture is so important for scaling, but it's definitely a lesson learned from a lot of companies that building organizational culture is super important. Initially, obviously, the culture is very much embedded and embodied in the personal values of the founder. But as the business scales, that becomes insufficient. I mean, one example is an Irish scaling company here, Aerogen. They actually it's a medtech company. They're a global leader in medical devices, in particular in high performance aerosol drug delivery. So delivering drugs quite deep into the lungs where it can be most effective if you have any kind of lung infection, for example, that needs treatment, and they're a global leader in that space. I actually looked them up. They're in 75 countries, and I looked up, they have a sales person in Sao Paulo as well. So definitely they're also active in your quarters. What was really interesting about Aerogen was that they found us very typical, inspirational, has strong personal values, really believed in being expert, so only global leadership. He wouldn't do anything else unless it's world class. To be very mindful, he's patient obsessed, always curious and committed to better patient outcomes, and particularly for the most vulnerable. So his technology he would have pioneered in infants, in acute care, and being very responsive, so to always seek the next innovative solution. And he was quite hesitant to admit that this was fine, being him irradiating these values during the early stages, but he only realized once he went to a couple of hundred employees, oh, I actually have to articulate and embed them more throughout the business because people don't know me anymore. Now we have employees in different markets. And obviously then, yeah, so that transition from personal values to organizational values to deeply articulate, to clearly articulate them, to embed them throughout the business, and also to make sure they're really authentic and not aspirational is super important, because what it does is, in a scaling business, if things are moving fast, if there's chaos, if it feels like turmoil for an employee, they need guidance. They need a guiding post and values. Obviously, in addition to a strong vision for the company, it absolutely offers that. And it's, yeah, one of those lessons learned that is super important. And I saw one of our PhD students, Sarah Bowen, on the call as well. She's researching, I suppose, what she calls serious scalers learn. So managers, executives that have scaled a second or third time, and culture is definitely also one that is jumping out of her research very strongly. So with that, I think we would be delighted to open the floor for questions and discussion. So thank you so much for now, and yeah, looking forward to unpacking some of those topics more with you.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you, Vanessa. It was a brilliant presentation. We learned a lot about scaling, the challenges of scaling, characteristics, and so on. I myself have so many questions to ask you. Even though I spent a month with you, I mean, every time I talk to you, I learn more and more about the process and this phenomenon. But we already have many questions that were asked while you were giving the presentation. So I don't know, Mateus, Daniel, maybe I can start.
Yes,
with
please go ahead.
Okay, so, well, Daniel asked if we have metrics to clarify that the business is indeed in that stage, like when we know that the business have moved on from let's say from the first stage to the second one to the third one. If we have like clear metrics or stages that we can identify and use.
It's a really, really tricky one, right? Because it's, as you said, it's that really one of the critical elements is, I mean, it's this idea of product market fit and having a viable business model. The idea of product market fit, typically some key indicators around here are around maybe repeat customers and really high net promoter scores, and maybe also from talking to VCs that have invested in companies that have scaled successfully. So really thinking that you start to get runaway demand, so that you really think, okay, you know, we're getting so many requests now for new customers, new signups, that we really start to see we have something there now that is innate. The customers love it. And so that product market fit is important. I think what we also work a lot on with companies is then to think also about the business model. Obviously, that's the value proposition type of thing, right? But also then to think about, okay, actually my activity system within to deliver that value proposition, to what extent is that ready to be scaled? So one exercise that we would have found useful to do with companies that I think that are ready for scaling is to think through, you have your business model now, this is how it works, and maybe tools like the business model canvas or similar could be useful. And then to think through about, okay, what would that look like at maybe 10x, 100x? So what if I was that larger business? What is this going to look like? And really what that brings often to the fore is maybe weak links or bottlenecks, or to see, okay, you know, what kind of things maybe I may have to invest early on into, right? To make sure they don't become bottlenecks and hold us back, to really then deliver on that. Yeah. So I do think that they're important. And obviously then it might also be a question around the financing of it, right? Because often obviously it might need some upfront investment. But they would be, in terms of product market fit and the viability of the business model, is really, really important. And unfortunately, there are companies maybe that do scale a little bit prematurely, right? Or they think they're ready and maybe they're not quite there yet. So we unfortunately we see that as well. But it is tricky. It's very tricky to diagnose, having said that.
Yes, I imagine, because I mean, businesses are different, right? So like they have different configurations and so on. The sectors change, and consequently, you'll have different ways of businesses organize themselves to scale. So Roberto asked many interesting questions here. So I'll try to summarize them, because his first set of questions was on the managerial excellence and the role played by managers, right? Like managers, they need more, like a general management expertise and experience, or more focused, like experience and knowledge on tech, on the tech side of the business, if it's let's say a tech driven business. So what's more important when it comes to scaling?
It is a really, really good question. I would think, because scaling comes with building out a top management team as well, because the business is becoming yeah, I mean, it's growing very rapidly. So you start to build a top management team, your leadership team, and then also different types of functions. And then it might depend, maybe as a founder. I mean, if the founder stays on, it probably becomes more as a in the CEO, it becomes more general manager, CEO type of role. But then obviously you look at complementarities, you look at team compositions. But I think that transition, that you start building out teams, functional heads that are specialists in their area, I think that is perhaps more so. I mean, that I think is a critical transition, because, and then you look at complementarities, maybe to see, you know, what's the best role for me in the business? How do I complement my expertise with others? But But I think this investment in scaling relevant in maybe in executives that have scaled before, it can be very, very valuable. And often these managers, look, often I would call it's a key strategic hire. So it would be a big investment in the business. Obviously, as a strategic hire, they demand quite high salaries, but I would think it can be a very, very worthwhile investment to really pull it off. Alternatively, obviously, you can think about your board composition as well, right? Who's serving on your board, maybe to gain access to that kind of expertise. And that maybe also where Vanessa's ideas around your connections, your network, and so forth is becoming important, because the types of advice that you will need differs from maybe the startup phase. And I think that being very conscious of that transition is useful. I don't know, Vanessa, if you would like to add to that.
Yeah, just a point on how you may start talking with more specialized service providers as well. In that sense, what Esther was saying, that you may have different needs when you're scaling, different needs in comparison to when you were a startup, and then the type of advice that you need when scaling is also different. You may need to talk with more specialized people, like people who have experience, or service providers that really can help you with specific points that you need to be aware of when scaling.
Okay, interesting. Carlo asked a very interesting question. Actually, it's a classic question, and we've been discussing that question in our research group, Vanessa, like the Center of Entrepreneurial Growth Studies, which is if a purely manufacturing company, right? If this kind of company can scale and even eventually become a unicorn, or if scaling is something that is only reserved to tech-led companies.
I mean, I think tech is tech, and by that, obviously, by extension, also digitalization is perhaps arguably a version of tech, is certainly an enabler. You know, remember that example that I mentioned at the end when we spoke about culture, Aerogen? I mean, they're doing medical devices, so they actually have production facilities. It is a gadget or a device that has to be manufactured, has to be shipped. You need supply chains, and you need to get it into the hospitals because it's used in acute care hospital types of settings. Obviously, the process differs. It often differs. So, for example, for Aerogen, it's a much more prolonged and perhaps slower, if that's for the wanting of a better word. They're still scaling, right? It's all fast, but by comparison, maybe to some of these hyperscalers and these crazy growth rates that you may see in software, it's at a much lower, in inverted commas, at lower pace. It also means because they have it's medtech, it's a lot of upfront investment. So they need patient capital because it's a much longer runway that they need to to scale up. I mean, obviously they had the technology, but the technology needs innovating, right? Constantly as well. Behind that, they have 300 patents behind their technology. So it's highly R&D intensive. That needs a big investment. And then obviously issues perhaps around scaling up supply chains. Again, there could be certain bottlenecks with certain suppliers and so forth that you may want to think about how it comes together as a delivery system. And hence, again, I think that notion of maybe really thinking through the business model in its entirety and how that could work at a higher volume is a very useful exercise because it's not specific to any industry, right? That's a very useful model that is transportable across sectors.
That's very, very interesting because usually, at least I'm talking about myself when I heard the word scaling, it really, we think about SaaS companies, software companies, like very tech-oriented companies in general, and like learning that there are companies like Aerogen, which are scaling very, even though they're going on slower than like purely software companies, but even though they are growing very fast, they're scaling their operations all over the world. I think it's a great news for everybody, right? By the way, I remember when I was in Galway, I heard a lot about Aerogen. I didn't have the opportunity to visit the company. Maybe next time, it's something I want to do definitely. Yeah. So we still have 3 minutes. So the last question, we have so many questions here, really, but unfortunately, we won't have the time to answer all those questions. But Marcelo asked, do we have structure and clear frameworks to plan growth and scaling strategies the same way we have for like a business model canvas? Like we have some kind of framework, some kind of tool that can be used by entrepreneurs, business owners that feel that they are at the right time of starting their scaling process?
Unfortunately, we don't have it's a really good question. And I think, unfortunately, because it's a relatively new phenomenon in terms of that it's more widespread. Obviously, there was always some high growth companies and some companies that were scaling, but it's a much more widespread phenomenon now. We don't have a lot of, let's say, textbook type of structured framework yet that it can be easily accessed. Having said that, there are a couple of articles, for example, in Harvard Business Review. There is one by Alicia De Santola and Gulati around startups that scale. That's quite useful. But it's not per se. There are some books as well of practitioners that have written about it. I think some have more or less usefulness for my own opinion, but I think Van Harnish, Scale Up, that's, for example, a book I think that many find useful. Yeah, so definitely a couple of Harvard Business Review articles, and the Scaling Up by Werner Harnisch could be some that I would recommend for those of you that would like to read into it further.
Oh yes, I read that book. It's a very good one. I agree with you, definitely. Harnisch, yeah. Yes, I remember the book. Yeah, so well, unfortunately, it's about time. Well,
Diego,
Oh, sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just that, may I just add one point on a couple of questions in the end?
Go ahead.
Because it's kind of very connected to my prior experience as well. So there's a couple of questions on franchising as a way of to scale operations. That's my prior experience. I have worked a couple of years in the Brazilian Franchising Association. So this relates a bit to my prior research as well. So there's a couple of ways of scaling. You can scale organically, like with your own resources and capabilities, but of course, that's franchising, acquisitions are other ways that are part of the alternatives for a company to grow and scale as well. I don't know, Esther, if you want to add some point on that, but just to make this point on franchising.
Yeah, no. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Because also the franchising idea allows you to leverage your business model at scale, and in a fast way. So absolutely, it can be very valuable path.
Okay, so thank you so much, Diego, Esther, and Vanessa. It was a pleasure. It was a very, very good session. Times go fast. 1 hour goes very fast. But I invite everybody here. Mateus just make it available, the contacts for all the professors by the chat. And you are also going to have an email right after this webinar with a channel for interaction with the professors. And our professor, Diego Marconato, is a researcher of this theme at FDC, and we have several programs and possibilities for you. I know that there is a very special discipline in our professional master program correlated to that. So if you want to go deeper on that, please let us know. You have my contact on the chat as well. And please pay attention because you're going to have another global seminars with very interesting topics as well.
Daniel,
Diego, please.
Yeah, if I may, we have a final survey. So just 2 questions to get your feedback on our seminar, because we want very much to learn about what you find about it. So please let me share my screen.
Perfect.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. I forgot to mention it before.
No worries. Yeah,
here,
this is
here you
great.
go. Yeah. So please feel free to take your vote. The results won't appear at this moment, but that will help us a lot to learn about your opinion. Oh, it's the answers are here. Yeah, sorry. 3, 9, 12, 14. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you, Diego, and all the professors. I would like to reinforce as well for you that is part of the network of alumni, or you are a student at FDC. We have several choices and opportunities for you to get abroad in our international schools for a semester, or for maybe a summer school, or for a couple days, or for research. So if you want to know more about that, you can send an email to internationaloffice fdc.org.br. Okay,
Yeah.
so thank you so much. I hope to see you guys in the next levels.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Honor.
you.
Thank you
you,
very
everybody.
much. Our pleasure.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.